I just sat still because I was so shook up about it. This massive animal and what it actually was when looking at it. It's a real experience for sure.
I think they're firmly established in the food chain. They're obviously breeding. I was 12 when I first saw the black panther, and those cats are still reported in the same area now. They're here to stay.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Hello and welcome to episode 115 of Big Cat Conversations. We're coming to you in September 2024 if you're listening on schedule, and thanks as ever for listening in and supporting the show. For this edition, we are catching up with some various big cat events reported in Scotland, so we'll get to those when we catch up with Paul Macdonald a bit later in the second half. But first, we are going to hear about an encounter that happened on the Isle of Skye, of all places. Our guest is Graham, and he's based in North Lanarkshire, east of Glasgow. So Graham, thanks for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure. I'm grateful for the invite.
Before we get going, could you explain what your connection is to the Isle of Skye? You were just a regular sort of visitor there, were you?
Yeah, that's right, Rick. So my wife and I, we got together in 2005, and I think my first trip to Skye was circa 2007, and we went a couple of times thereafter. However, I would say the last 12 to 14 years, maybe slightly longer actually, I've been going, several times a year, 2 or 3 times a year anyway. I do a lot of fishing, and latterly, I'd say the last 4 or 5 years, it's been spearfishing that's captured my interest. So it's a great place. It's what I call my happy place. So that's where I go to relax. It's an incredible place, almost prehistoric. It's 50 miles long at its longest point, and I think around 25 miles wide. So it's a lot of land to explore. There's everything from Munros, lots of hills in Munros, forestry, moorlands, peat bogs, just everything, and of course the surrounding coastline. It's quite a spectacular place. It really is.
Very sparsely populated, mostly, isn't it?
Yeah, so there is towns round about. Broadfoot's sort of south of the island, and Portree sort of placed halfway up on the east coast, and there are other sort of places, outlying towns and villages, but there's not much, to be honest. It's lots of single track roads and sheep and deer and that sort of thing.
Now, before the incident happened, what was your connection with big cats? Were you aware of them? Did you have a view on big cat sightings? Had you heard that it could be a thing?
I'll be honest, I was a police officer for just over 10 years, and I've heard of these things, not through the police, but I've heard of these things through either social media or news outlets or these kind of things, pictures in newspaper, and I would honestly have been the first person to dismiss that as absolute nonsense until September 2021 when the encounter happened. So I've never been directly involved in anything like that until then. So yeah, it was an eye-opener.
It's intriguing that you spent 10 years with the police force and didn't hear any big cats that way. I guess that was that your police force may well have had big cat reports to them from members of the public, like most police constabularies do, but they just didn't reach you because it wasn't your remit and it wasn't your area, presumably.
Yeah, that's right. I worked in a place called Wishaw, and it was quite it was kind of large town, and there's not many sort of rural areas round about. However, Strathclyde at that point, before it became Police Scotland, Strathclyde was a large area, and I have no doubts there would have been reports. They just wouldn't reach me unless it was in my area.
Good stuff. Okay, well, let's get on to your incident. So you were visiting the Isle of Skye as a fisherman or as a tourist at this time, were you? And can you take us through all events?
I'll start from the beginning. I was new to spearfishing, and I had reached out to a chap who's now a friend of mine on YouTube. We arranged to go spearfishing, and it turned out he was actually a police officer. We didn't know that until we met. We spent the day out in the water. He's got a boat. We spent the day out doing our thing. A successful trip. I came back in, and I sort of chose a nice quiet spot that I know to spark up the barbecue and have some scallops and some fresh fish that I'd caught. This would have been maybe 9:45 at night. Skye is a really dark place. There's no sort of light pollution, so it's just really dark, and it's beautiful. You see the stars sort of popping in the sky. And it was an area there's a small river. It's remote, but it's near a small village in the northwest of Skye. So probably about 11:15, I had just finished my tea, and I was talking to my wife on the phone. I was just telling her how beautiful it was and what I was doing, and I was just sort of getting ready to pack up. And on the right-hand side of me, there's a small river, and I'd say maybe 7 or 8 metres away, I just caught something moving. Because I didn't have a torch on at this point. It was just, everything was pitch black. But you know, when you get a dark room or a dark area and you see something darker than dark, it sort of just, it catches your peripheral vision moving. And that caught my eye. So I flicked the head torch on and I just froze. I was just astounded because it was as clear as I can see my hand in front of my face just now. Absolutely certain. I've done the research now. I think it was a melanistic leopard. I would say it was around sort of halfway up my thigh, so sort of 65 to 68 centimetres tall, and maybe 4 feet or so long. Long, sort of narrow tail, slightly curled at the end, very nimble, sort of, how would I describe it? Stealthy, sleek, and agile. Not in the slightest bit interested in me at all. I had it's called a lead lenser head torch. 600 lumens at 150 metres, this would light up a football pitch. And so I'm in no doubts what I could see. Yeah, I was just terrified. I stood up slowly and said to my wife, I tried to say, look, I can see this. I can see a big cat. And she said, what do you mean a cat? I said, like, a big cat. I said, my name's Shona. I said, Fia, I can see a big cat. I'm like a leopard or a puma or something. So I bent down really slowly and I picked my knife up for doing the scallops and the fish. I sort of started to walk back, but it stopped and looked at me, but just was not interested at all. Sort of piercing bright eyes, the torch was reflecting off its eyes, and it just turned and continued on its journey down the side of the river. It got maybe 15 metres away or so, and then turned and jumped up into the bushes, and that was the last I saw of it. So absolutely terrifying.
Terrifying because it was so close.
Yeah, even talking about it just now, and my forehead's sort of prickly sweat, and because it's like sort of reliving that experience. I've seen, since the incident, I've been on and looked at many things on social media, and the first thing that a lot of people will say is, why didn't you get a picture, or why didn't you do this, or you just don't. The last thing I thought of was I need to get a picture. I was terrified to go off the phone because my wife was on the other line, and I thought if I go off the phone, then I'm alone. It wasn't aggressive in any way, shape or form. It was just going about his business. But it was just terrified because I know I know what it was, and I know the potential. Yeah, I think I was lucky. I mean, I say lucky. I think it was tame, but I still feel lucky. I still feel very lucky.
What distance away was it again?
Probably, I'd say maximum 8 metres, maybe 7 metres. It's just that there's a very small river. The river's maybe about 1.5 metres wide. It was just the other side of the banking, so super close.
We had a gentleman, I think it was episode 29 or 30, where they had the phone in their hand, he and his wife, and they were walking their dogs, and they did consider taking footage, but they just wanted to concentrate on the cat with it being so close. So that really wasn't a priority to try and document the incident.
It didn't cross my mind once. It was, at no point did I think, well, let's get a picture, or that was the last thing that ever came into my mind. I mean, I kick myself now because it would, in hindsight, but you don't know. A, you're in total shock, and B, you just don't know what it's capable of, or to be honest, disbelief. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. No beer involved as well. So
Yeah. Now, your wife presumably was picking up the emotion and quickly realised you weren't bluffing and trying to fool her. Is that right?
Oh yeah. So I said to my wife, I said, look, if anything, you need to. I told her where I was. I reiterated where I was. I said, if I drop the phone and anything happens, you need to phone the police. And that's, I think, just about all I said. I can't really remember a whole lot of what was discussed. I remember saying there's a big cat multiple times as I walked slowly backwards. I was aware not to run or do anything that would imitate sort of prey or drive a sort of prey instinct, a reaction to that. I just walked back very slowly and continued to face it.
Presumably it could hear this conversation, and so it was very much aware of you visually and audibly.
100%. It was right next to me. 7 or 8 metres is nothing, and I sometimes wonder why. I think about this quite a lot. Why did it pass me? Was it the fact that it was cooking? Was it the fact that it was inquisitive because I was there? I was making a noise, or was it part of its just general patrol in its territory? I don't really know, but it just appeared, and it came from sort of behind, upstream. So it came from behind down past my right side, and it was just that movement, the dark shape moving that caught my peripheral vision.
So it came from inland as well. It wasn't from the coast.
It would have been coming down the riverbank, essentially. Where I was sitting, it's right at the point where the river enters the sea, into a sea loch. So it was right at that point.
There would have been a smell. You would have had a smoky, fishy smell, and that perhaps might have alerted it.
Yeah, possibly. It was certainly. I had a barbecue and I was cooking scallops, and I'd had fish as well. And I don't know whether that would attract a big cat or not. It's something that has crossed my mind, possibly, or was it just me that it was inquisitive because I was sitting there and doing my thing. It's one thing that I know for certain is that it wasn't. I didn't feel in danger from it, as in it was going to attack me, but I felt fearful because I know that's you don't get that in the UK.
And it was perfectly aware of you.
It stopped opposite me. So when I stood up, I was sitting on a camping chair, and I stood up. It stopped and turned around, and it didn't turn to face me; it just turned its head and looked at me. And my torch was reflecting off its eyes. It was like two beams of light shining back at me. It just froze and looked at me, and then carried on nonchalant just down the riverbank as if nothing, just completely relaxed and not a care in the world.
Why did you think it could be not wild, basically? You felt it was sort of out of captivity but belonging to somebody, or freshly out of captivity, or something that was let out of captivity that knew to go back home because it was fed there. You felt more that than it being wild, did you?
It's hard to say. I mean, I would doubt that this belongs to somebody. I think it's probably, it knows people, or it knows humans. It's familiar with humans. So I get no feeling of agitation or anger from it. Or I'm quite sure if that was a wild leopard and I was there, I've got prey written all over me. I've got my back to it initially, but it just, I think it didn't see me as prey.
I mean, in fairness, the wild ones don't hunt people, so that's why I feel you shouldn't discount it being a perfectly wild, experienced wild one.
Yeah, it could well be. It seemed so relaxed that I thought it must be familiar with humans, but then, I don't know enough about big cats to say one way or the other.
As we said earlier, not many people on Skye for it to encounter if it's in the remoter parts of the landscape.
There's a lot of areas that are just rural, and of course, being the sort of nocturnal species, it'd be very difficult to spot. There's so much landscape for it to patrol, the likelihood of somebody spotting it. To be honest, there has been other sightings, two of it that I'm aware of, not sightings, but there was one other sighting that I'm aware of in Skye back in 2015, around about Toravaig, and then there was another crofter had reported sheep being mauled, 2 sheep, and that was Shag, which is just north of Portree, I think.
Yeah, huge open remote areas where very little human occupation and activity, so it has got the place to itself. And it's presumably there's red deer and roe deer on Skye.
I've not seen any roe deer, but I've seen plenty red deer. I mean, they're in abundance, and there's more sheep than people. Along with the deer, there's not a shortage, that's for sure.
Now, had you not had your torch, your illumination, would you have seen it? Would you have noticed it so much? And you certainly wouldn't have been able to get the detail, would you?
I would never have known that it was a big cat. So I saw something moving. I could see that it was fairly large, but I would have assumed that it was an animal of sorts, like a deer or something. It was akin to the size of a sort of German Shepherd, that sort of height and length. Slender, though, like more agile, and it was clearly a big cat, but I would never have known. I could see something moving, but if I didn't have the torch, I would never have known that that's what it was. Never.
Did you get the eye shine? Did you get reflectivity from the eyes?
Yeah, it was like 2 sort of torches beaming straight back at me. Very, very, very piercing. Big, wide eyes. Did
they reflect the colour of whichever colour you had your torch on, or did they? Well, what colour were they?
I would say my recollection would be piercing bright white, which would be the sort of colour of my head torch, but whether it's reflecting, whether that's from the light or if it's reflecting the light or what it is, I don't know. It was just bright, piercing reflection.
How interesting that you'd written off all the reports and you were in an area that you wouldn't have thought there'd be a cat in Britain. And so how did you find out that there'd been a previous report on Skye?
It was that night. So I phoned the police after I saw it. I phoned 999 and I spoke to the operator I saw, explained what I'd seen. When I went back to the accommodation that night, I started Googling things and trying to find out if there was other sightings. And then that's when I came across these two other records on the internet. So one was, I think it was February 2015, I think, and that was the one in Torrevieig, and it was a chap that was sort of a keen wildlife photographer. He saw it from quite a distance away. He thought it was originally thought it was a fox or something big, but he got his binoculars out and could see that it was clearly a big cat. And interestingly, when you look at the thread on this, he gets the mickey taken out of him because he asks, he says, "Look, am I losing my mind seeing? I know what I saw, and this just seems surreal." People just sort of mocked him, and I can relate to that because I would probably be the person that would dismiss that.
The police call that you made, you explained you were an ex-police officer, so that would hopefully enhance your credibility with them. But what was their view of your report?
You would have thought that would be the case, but sadly no. When I called, and I can understand, I genuinely understand how ludicrous it might seem because I've been there. Well, the first thing I said is, "Look, I'm an ex-police officer. I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous. Please believe me when I'm about to tell you." And I explained what I had, and it was via 999, which is just ridiculous because it's not an ongoing sort of life or death scenario, but I just felt so panicked that this is what I did. And it was just like, "Oh, right, okay, yeah, oh, okay, yeah." And I thought they just don't, and I said to them, "You don't believe it, please believe me." My friend who had been spearfishing, I spoke to him the following day. I just met him that day, but he's now a friend, as I say. But he sort of tells me that there was a get-together the following day in the office, and they're sort of, "Have you seen this incident?" They put an incident on, and they're all sort of laughing at it, thinking, it's a bit of a joke. And in fact, I think a couple of weeks later, I got a message from him saying, and it's a picture of a black mog, and he's going, "I found your big cat," laugh. So he had me stored in his phone as Puma, as the nickname. So yeah, it was just a total, people just don't believe you, but.
A total coincidence. He turned out to be working for the local police force and they got to hear of that via the 999 call desk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Often when people do phone the police force, it gets their local constabulary, and it comes down to, the type of reaction comes down to the experience of the person on the switchboard or the person it's relayed to. Of course, some officers know it's a thing and others don't, and it's obviously not going to be a high priority. There's not a lot they can do, particularly in that location. Your motive for calling them was what? What did you feel they could do about it, or did you just want them to log it?
I felt like they need to do something about it. I felt I was scared with what I had just experienced. I was full of adrenaline, and I felt like that was a very credible danger and risk. And I expected some sort of reaction, somebody to come out and investigate it and to deal with it, because there's a big cat on Skye, and that's potentially dangerous. I just expected a reaction. When it got dismissed, it was really disheartening. It sort of blew the wind out my sails a bit. And it was only until recently when I came across the Cat Scotland's sighting page on Facebook, and I sort of thought, well, I'll put the story out, and I was overwhelmed by the response I got, and I put the pictures of the print on, and that sort of led to this, and it's been really good to have somebody actually listening.
On reflection now, can you consider how unrealistic it is for a police force to do anything about sighting in that remote place? I mean, the sighting in most places, really, what are they going to do? They haven't got the equipment, the skills, the techniques to recover anything, and they'll obviously cause a commotion, and anything as stealthy and wary as a big cat is going to go to ground very quickly if there is a whole bunch of people and machines and helicopters and barking dogs or whatever around.
I think there was a great opportunity there for, an official body to come out and investigate it and look at the print. I never actually showed them the print because it was dismissed, but if they had come out and looked at it or contacted me, and it would have been a great opportunity to have that analysed by a professional and somebody to sort of say, yes, this does belong to a big cat, and therefore we know for certain there is a big cat on Skye. And if nothing more, it gives that sort of raises awareness and just makes people aware that this sort of thing does go on in the UK. These animals are out there.
Yeah. Did you mention it to any sort of local people that you bumped into?
When I go up there, I tend to stay in remote areas and get away from the towns and then do my thing. So, less the sort of local shop. But no, I didn't mention it. And the only people I've mentioned it to ever since is until now really is close friends and family, and that's been it.
Because it would have been interesting to know, because I think some people have had sightings or whatever and just keep quiet because they realise what a hassle it is. There can be all sorts of unintended consequences of letting something like that get out into the grapevine, and other people wouldn't believe it. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't start mentioning it.
It would be interesting to know what it would do for tourism, whether it would Skye's a busy place, and would it increase tourism or would it damage tourism? I don't know. There has to be other sightings out there. There must be.
Yeah. Although, as you said, a stealthy cat, moving around at night, it's not going to be seen that often, to be honest.
Yeah.
So you went back in daylight and you found the print where it had been, the other side of the small river, yeah?
Yeah, so I plucked up the courage the following day. I went back the following morning, first thing, trusty knife in pocket, and walked gingerly down the riverbank. The first print I saw, I thought it looked like a print. I wasn't too sure, and then I carried on down the riverbank a bit further, just to the point where it would have jumped up into the bushes. It was sort of gorse bush, and there was a sort of quite a significant print there. It was fairly deep, and you could see quite clearly that's what it was. So, I took a picture of it, and then I put a £1 coin down next to it and took a picture of the print with the £1 coin for scale. I'm so glad I did that because, again, that's a bit of closure as well for me.
That's very nice. And you just found the one, did you? Didn't find a trackway, a trail?
No, I didn't find a trail. I looked up and down the riverbank where it was. It's stone, and it goes down into a sort of area of soft grass and then a bit of mud, and it was just in that sort of soft grass where I saw the print. Just luck, I guess, that's where there's a gap in the gorse, and that's where it jumped. So what I presume would be the back paws that depresses down to leap up the embankment.
Yeah, I mean, I showed that to Mark Graves, who is a regular on this podcast, who's, as people know, has had 18 years intense experience tracking leopards in South Africa. And looking at it myself, I thought, wow, yeah, that is a strong possibility. It's a shame it's just not clearer. It's just, I mean, you'll admit that it isn't a perfect impression, and that's the problem. So Mark gave the reaction of probable, very likely, but I can't say for sure because you cannot see the detail. You can see the shape and the scale, but you can't quite see the detail of the impression of each pad itself. So he wasn't prepared to say, yes, definitely a leopard. He was just prepared to say, yes, very likely a big cat. Can't say for absolute certain, but not ruling it out at all. It helps the case, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good stuff. Did you then start thinking about how come there's a big cat on Skye? A big cat on the Scottish mainland is one thing, but to get onto an island like Skye is another. And did you go through the theories of how it could have got there?
I've pondered over this many times since then. One thing that always sort of stuck to my mind was that an exotic pet, that's what came into my mind. And, going back to what I said earlier on about me thinking that it was tame and that it was used to people, and I had that sort of feeling that perhaps it had been a pet at some point, maybe it got too big and somebody released it.
So it was owned and in captivity on Skye and then released and stayed on the island. So its origins were on Skye in captivity.
It's hard to say, but I think that's probably more probable than swimming across the gap or going across the bridge. It is entirely possible to walk across the bridge or to swim. I think I looked on the maps and at its shortest point, just south of Kyle of Loch Alsh, it's 430 metres, but it's a fair old swim and there's a strong current there.
I think that's unlikely. I mean, they have to be really motivated to swim any distance, to be honest. So now the road bridge is, how long is the road bridge?
Oh, well, I think it must be at least 550, 600 metres or so, give or take, because it goes in 2 points. It goes across a small island, and the first bridge goes across to this sort of passes over this small island and then goes to the next section. Combined, you're probably talking maybe between 500 and 600 metres long. At
night time, there'll be periods of no traffic whatsoever at the dead of night, wouldn't there?
Yeah, there will be for sure. There'll be periods, from From the evening onwards, it'll be very quiet. In the early hours of the morning, it'll probably be very, very little, if anything at all.
That is a very strong candidate for me, I think. I think a wandering cat, they often do like to investigate funneling points like that, particularly if any other animals have been there as well. So I don't rule that out. I think that's a possibility. I think there's one other theory, and I don't know whether you've considered this, particularly as a police officer, and that is just dubious cargo getting on a boat and boat having to make a landing on Skye and its dubious cargo being jettisoned, basically. Have you considered that as a police officer?
To be honest, I haven't. I guess anything is possible. It's an island. There is always a possibility of a landing and cargo being offloaded. It's just hard to sort of imagine that in a small island in Skye. Scotland. It just seems the fact that I saw a big cat is equally crazy and unbelievable in my mind. I wouldn't rule anything out, to be honest.
Exotic animals are carried on boats. There's no doubt about it. And they do get released and escape that way, and they or carried off by people who are trying to sort of smuggle them off to then sort of use as some kind of currency to trade or whatever. I don't think we can completely discount that sort of thing. So I think there's more theories than we probably might immediately reckon.
From what I've read, I'm fairly certain that it was a leopard.
Yeah.
And it was black, so therefore melanistic. And so from an exotic pet point of view, it's not your typical leopard. It's something exotic. It's different. It's rare. That sort of made me think, there is a possibility that somebody has had it and have released it at some point.
Yes, but you're aware, Graham, that the majority of the reports across Britain are melanistic leopards, black panthers, and mainly assumed to be leopards in their black form. They breed on black. Their origins are from wartime or the 1970s release from the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, and they bred on. So it could equally be that one has just, bred on and lived on and is experienced in the Scottish mainland and just walked over the bridge from the mainland population. So I think there's that. And of course, those were originally people's pets that got dumped and let out. And that's why they can seem so chilled out, if you like, and unfazed, because they are king of their surroundings, and a human is just a sort of pesky irrelevance, really, in their neighbourhood.
I'll be honest, I felt like a pesky irrelevance, to be honest.
I reckon, had you not been there, it might well have leapt the burn, as it were, and come across and investigated the smell, particularly if it was, being a large carnivore. That's an interesting smell for a large carnivore.
Yeah, no doubts there was definitely strong smells that were coming from the barbecue, and I'm quite sure it would certainly be of interest to it.
Yeah. Now, you were mentioning that there was a guy who was tattooed and in the Guinness Book of Records for the most sort of comprehensive tattoo, more or less, head to toe, of leopard rosettes, and he was called the Leopard Man of Skye, and he was nicknamed Tom Leopard. Before we came on, I looked at a BBC web snippet about him when he passed away. I think he died in 2015.
A number of years ago, he passed away.
Yeah, well, we put that little web report on him on the website, and can you tell us what you'd heard about him?
He's certainly an intriguing character, and as you say, tattooed from head to toe, and the pictures I've seen sort of looks like he has his teeth sort of sharpened like a carnivore. My understanding was he lived quite a remote life, a lot of living off the land, and I think he was a scallop diver, I believe. He used to canoe into the local town to get groceries and then paddle his way back out again. I did find it, quite intriguing that he's that sort of connection with leopard. That from what I saw, and then of course, was he aware of something? Did he know that there was a leopard on Skye? But yeah, it's an interesting story and definitely worth looking up for sure.
I should emphasise we're in no way suggesting that he's linked to this or might be linked to this. It's just an interesting talking point.
Yeah.
The web report, this BBC web report, just says he was ex-military. He lived in a bothy for the latter part of his life before going to a care home. The tattoos reflected his very strong interest in big cats, apparently, which you'd imagine. We don't know why he had this interest in big cats and if it manifested in any other way, of course. That's what we don't know.
Wouldn't it be good to ask the question? Is there a connection? Is there no connection? Is it just complete coincidence? But it's an interesting story, and as I say, it's definitely worth clicking on the link and having a look at that and quite a story.
It's prompted me to just mention something I don't think I've ever covered on the podcast before. A lot of people who've got tattoos have big cats amongst them. It's obviously an iconic image for tattoos. And there was a guy a few years back when my late father was in hospital. The next guy in the ward had some really impressive tattoos round his neck and top of his back. And of course, we got chatting to him regularly because he was the next person in the bay in hospital to Dad. And I couldn't resist asking him about his big cat tattoos. And he didn't know my background or anything. And he just said to me, he said, well, you must believe me that these animals live in Britain. I've seen them 3 times. And that's that's what motivated him to get those particular tattoos, even though he had other tattoos on his body. And it basically turned out that he lived in a mobile bus. He would park it on verges or bits of common land or bits of wasteland where it was free and easy to park up for a few nights at a time. And on 3 occasions, once down in Devon and twice in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire, and we were at Gloucester Hospital, so I think he was largely in Gloucestershire. He had been in places which were remote and wild and had deer and whatever at the back of the view. And of course, he was there for long periods of time looking out the window. He's had 3 sightings of black panthers, presumably black leopards, in his time, and that's what prompted him to get the tattoos. He didn't know he was talking to a relevant person when he was explaining it, but he was very insistent that I should believe him. And of course, I did believe him.
A great candidate for a podcast, for sure. I quite believe it too. I really do.
From his lifestyle and where he parks up a bus, in wild and scruffy remote places, it's perfectly plausible. And it all added up. Okay, well, looking back on this, Graham, can I ask you sort of how it's influenced you? Clearly, you're a believer and you were a skeptic, but beyond that, how has it influenced you in your sort of view of the outdoors and as a fisherman and somebody goes to Skye and whatever? What kind of effect has it had on you?
I'm just back from Skye. I was up in Skye Friday, Saturday and came back on Sunday. I went to the same place, so it's not like it's made me sort of fearful to go back. However, I tend to go with somebody. I was with my brother, and I always sort of make the joke. We were out in the evening. I'm saying, can you imagine round the corner and we saw it? It's this sort of. It's always in the back of your mind that the potential that is there. I'm not fearful when I go back to Skye, but it does sort of linger in the back of my mind that there is always the possibility. Deep down, I know the likelihood of seeing it again, and all the the size of Skye. I think it's highly unlikely I'll ever see it again. But it still sort of makes you think, definitely.
I'm getting the feeling that it's not as positive for you as it is for some people. I mean, what kind of emotions do you have about it and about the animal? Say there was a deliberate policy to track it down and remove it, either by dispatching it or trapping it and whatever. How would you feel about that?
Oh, I would never want to see it come to harm. And I don't think it was, there's been no reports of anybody being attacked or harassed, or it would be quite unfair to say that it should be tracked down. Or, however, in the back of my mind, there's a species there that is potentially dangerous, and I know that shouldn't be there. So I guess police head sort of sticks there of public protection, and that should be dealt with. But in a humane, I don't mean slaughtered, or should it be captured, or should it be? I don't know. I just don't know.
There's a counter-argument that they don't naturally hunt people down in their native countries. We're not on the prey list. People coexist largely with leopards in their native countries. They don't, proactively hunt humans. They seem to have been here for decades. They've been reported here for decades without causing much of a hassle for people. So there is that side of it.
There's a lot of lack of education as well, and I include myself in that. I don't know enough about it because it's not an animal that I'm familiar with. I know what a leopard is, but they're not from UK, so I don't tend to. It's lack of education, and that's where I think if the government or another official body said categorically, this is a factual, we know they are there, and this is how we. This is how we manage it, or this is how you deal with it if you come across an encounter, or some sort of guidance. But it would be easy to spark fear and irrational behaviour, and I guess that's always the risk as well when we talk about where it was and what happened, is that people descend and start hunting or looking for this thing, and it's not done any harm, and it didn't do me any harm at all. I wouldn't want it to come to harm for, definitely not. Lack of education, as I say, I probably missed out in one of the best experiences of my life, through fear.
I guess that's totally natural. You were so close to it. You couldn't really admire it from a distance, could you? You were bound to feel, blimey, this is, leaping distance away from me, literally.
That's a good way of describing it. Within sort of one leap, it would be there. But I never got that feeling, but it was surreal. It really was. It was surreal.
Do you think there's some people now, Graham, who didn't believe you at the time who've changed their view? Or do you think people just stick to their view? Some people didn't believe you and they carry on don't believing you.
So the only people I've told is close friends and family, and I know they believe me. The one person I would say that didn't probably believe me to start with, that now does, is my friend from Skye, who was the police officer, he's now ex-police officer, and I think he was sceptical because he didn't know me at that point. We'd only met that night, so. But we've gotten to know each other over the last few years and keep in regular contact. So he's the first to say, I believe what you saw, but it was difficult at the time because he didn't know me.
And of course, it was beyond his experience and beyond his comfort zone.
Of all the things that you get sent to the police, many strange and unusual things, a big cat is not something that many police officers will be sent to or even hear about. Other than media outlets, it's not a common occurrence. So.
It's good that you found that since reporting it to the Big Cats of Scotland research people and Paul Macdonald's network, there's a system, if you like, now to follow this up and put it in perspective and talk it through. That's a good outcome, hopefully.
It was almost validated, and I felt like actually there's people here that are prepared to listen and that acknowledge that this wasn't delusional. It felt really good to have somebody or people to listen. Paul was the sort of first person to reach out via message, and he's given me lots of good information and sort of helped me understand what it was that I saw and sort of put the pieces, the jigsaw together. So.
Really good. And of course, for us, it's extra intriguing because it's on an island, and it still does beg that question of how on earth it got there in the first place. Because, we sort of think we've got a lot of the other sightings not sussed, but we understand it's more a plausible context and background to the other sightings that routinely happen across the British mainland, including Scotland, but on the Isle of Skye, is that just that extra puzzle, which is adds interest, yeah.
Well, there could be more than one. There's the possibility that there's, who knows?
Yeah, there certainly seems to be more than one on Anglesey. And, of course, Anglesea's got a road bridge, but it's also close to shipping lanes between Ireland and Liverpool. It's just frustrating. There aren't more documented reports. There may be locally known reports on Skye, but as far as we know, there aren't more documented reports on Skye. But maybe this one getting out onto a podcast may prompt some others, so we'll watch out for that.
Hopefully, if anything comes of it, there might be other people that speak up and perhaps talking about that jigsaw that I mentioned, but maybe able to put some more pieces together.
Good stuff. Well, thanks ever so much for covering all these points with us. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close off?
I guess the only thing I would say is to people that are listening and that maybe are a bit sceptical, and that's to understand that it's not always as simple as pick your phone and get a picture. In the moment, you can be quite irrational and I guess have an open mind with these things, because I would have been in your boots before, and here I am now on the other side of the fence. So,
presumably, say it had been a safe distance, middle distance, and you having time. What was the total time of the sighting, do you think?
Jinx! I would say from the point I saw it to the point I lost sight of it, maybe 1 minute, maybe just over a minute as it strolled down the bank.
Do you think that had it been at a safe distance where you could reflect on it and illuminate it and come to terms with it, if you like, you might, in the second half of that incident, you would have thought, hang on, I could get my phone out, and, well, you had your phone, of course, that's the other thing. You had your phone on. Do you think you might have thought about recording it?
I probably would have, yeah. It depends if I felt safe. I didn't feel safe, and that goes down to the education part of it, as you say. Yeah, I probably would. It's hard to say because until you're in the circumstances, you don't quite know how you're going to react, but I would imagine if it was a safe distance, and when I say a safe distance, I mean half a football field away, whenever I feel like I've got a bit of cover, then probably. But I'm aware of how quickly a leopard could run, and whether that's irrational and it's going to do that or not. In my mind at the time, there was every possibility.
Just as we're talking, I know we're about to sign off, but I'm thinking of another similar case that I heard. Or again, I don't know if I've mentioned it on previous podcasts, but it was in a woodland in Gloucestershire where we do get a number of reports. So the report didn't surprise me. And the witness lady, when she mentioned it to me at one of the rural shows, she was pleased that there were other cases from this area because it reassured her, basically. And she said she saw it when she was on the phone to her daughter.
Uh-huh.
It does equate to you being on the phone to your wife, really.
Yep.
Her daughter encouraged her because she said, a bit like you and your wife, she started saying to her daughter about where she was and if anything happened, that she wanted to let her daughter know. And her daughter said, "Come on, Mum, get off the phone and try and get a picture of it." Good for her daughter to get priorities right.
Yeah, our daughter perhaps was, in that moment herself, was probably more rational.
Both people are right, aren't they, in a way? The witness has got the emotion and the worry, and the person at the other end of the phone, although a relative, is obviously wanting the evidence and the heart isn't racing so much.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been such an incredible thing to take a picture of so close. It would have been as clear as the back of my hand. And it is such a shame, but faced with the same circumstances, I would probably do the same thing again because it wasn't a conscious thought to not take a picture. It just went into my head. It was just panic and shock.
Good stuff. Well, thanks ever so much for going through the case with us. Really fascinating one. And we're now on to second half. We're now on to Paul Macdonald with some other past cases from Scotland. But thank you very much for this one from Skye to start us off with, Graham. Thanks ever so much for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
Thank you, Rick. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for listening to me.
There's a puma up by Carnif as Kent bith far and wide, to be the great black beastie upon sweet Divern side. The beastie o'th on Muckletun, he is bith hard and sair, upon the pier all the ways that are his favourite fare. At 6 o'clock he creeps about just as the sun goes down, and he sniffs the air for he ways that he will hear recht soon. For after he has sniffed about and found a juicy sheep, it's then he has his breakfast as ye are gone to sleep. Say, shepherds, guard your ain good sheep and chase a wath on beast, for if ye dinna mind them, the beast will hae a feast. And there's some say there are twa of them, and some say there is nane, but something is gae hungry, and it leaves just skin and bane. O fare ye well, ye muckle cat, or are ye just a rumour? O fare ye well, ye great black beast, then gin ye're no a puma. O fare ye well, whate'er ye be, for we will hae your skin, and we'll shoot ye again we find ye in Kearney or the Ben.
Well, next up we have Paul Macdonald. He's a good friend of the show and he coordinates research and investigations in Scotland. And he helps run the Big Cat Sightings in Scotland Facebook group, so you can catch up with him there. And we heard from Paul 3 times previously, and those appearances were episode 16, 61 and 91. This is going to be a quick catch-up with Paul to hear some nuggets of the best information and reports to come his way in recent months. So Paul, nice to have you back with us. How are you?
Hi Rick, I'm very well and it's great to be back.
Good stuff. And I know we're going to talk about some events that you've been coordinating out in different parts of Scotland, and they lead to some of the highlights we'll hear. And as you know, the first person on this episode is Graham, who you linked us with kindly when you heard about the Skye sighting. Paul, what's your reckoning? What's your lead theory for one of these big black cats on Skye? You say there's been some sightings on the mainland, but close to the bridge to Skye. Now, couldn't one just walk over the bridge?
Realistically, I think it's probably the most realistic possibility. Traffic around that area of the Highlands is going to be very, very light, if any, during the small hours. So the bridge itself is the most realistic possibility, yep.
Interesting if there's just one over there and it's sort of stranded, really. I mean, I know you'll be on the case. If you get any others from Skye, we'll no doubt hear about it. You'll map them.
Curiously enough, it wasn't too long ago. I think it was sometime last year. I was on Skye, the southern side, I can say, and I came across a sheep carcass. And it was on closer study that it looked as though there was impact signs on the mandible, which is the first bones we look at. The carcass, it wasn't in the choicest of conditions to be taking back to the car, let's say. It's left for another time. And I will be back up again on Skye towards the end of this year, so we'll see if that might still be there.
Okay, well, good luck with that. I mean, if it's bones, skeletal remains can be snaffled at later times if they're still there, and they've got bleached and weathered more, so they're not so smelly and rotted down and good for the lab to inspect. So, yeah, well, good luck with that. Thank you for that, Paul. We'll move on now to things that have cropped up at events, and we're going to start with the rural shows you've done, because I know you've had some actual footage shown to you. So, I mean, I get this at rural shows. People get out their phone and show you stuff, and they don't necessarily give it to you, but you see it. So we're going to hear about that. We're going to hear about at least one road casualty body alleged, a very detailed report of that, which is really interesting. So let's start with the rural shows then.
Yeah, there's the Scottish Game Fair at Scone Palace, which is one of the main rural events in Scotland, and it's ideal for us. For our calendar, it gives us a chance to engage with landowners and with gamekeepers and farmers and such, and folk who are more generally involved with the land and rural sports.
And that was in July, wasn't it? Early July?
Yes, it was, yep.
Can we hear about, first of all, the two bits of footage you got shown?
Yeah, this year we got shown two quite decent bits of footage. One was from a pest controller. It was actually in Northumberland and showed us a quality piece of footage. We ended up following up on that, and we did get that one in to us, which was great. So we classed that as a result. And the other, I can just say, was northeast Scotland. Was really quite decent, and there were images that went with this also. Again, really quite decent, that you could say on first appearance certainly looked like black leopard, and would have loved to have got those ones in to do further analysis on. They've not got back to us, and sadly, I'm sure you know yourself, we often hit dead ends on following up on good footage and good images and good evidence. And sadly, that proved to be one of those cases for us.
Yeah, I think people just realise the consequences and think, they don't want to get involved in any backlash or anything get too heavy for them. I understand it. It means a lot to us, but other people, yes. It also means a lot in different ways, because if it's their land or their locality, they don't want a commotion and they do want a quiet life.
It is absolutely understandable. Though a little frustrating when, we're obviously trying to gather the best evidence possible, and you might see it there firsthand, but it doesn't go any further than that.
Can you just sort of describe what you saw in the Northumberland ones, first off, though?
Yeah, that was quite a decent piece of footage of what was very clearly a cat, and a large cat, moving from right to left across the screen. The great thing about it was there was scaling available in terms of the distances that the witness was able to provide with this. He knew the field very well that he was operating in, and he knew the relative distances of the width of the field. And, so if an animal was seen halfway or a quarter way across that, he could quite accurately gauge the distance footage was taken at. He was able to provide that from the distance the cat was seen at, which was approximately 600 yards. And he then provided a scaling image of a fox taken at 300 yards. And even though the fox was at half the distance away, the relative size of the cat in still images was slightly larger than the fox. So that told us that, that cat's at twice the distance away. It's going to be significantly larger than the fox in that sense, possibly as about twice, even possibly a little more than twice as large as the fox from nose to backside in the body.
So a cat the size of which can kill a deer, which is what we're interested in, and you then have to work out what species, what type it is if you can. But of course in nighttime footage, whether it's thermal or infrared, that's a real challenge often. So this was it taken on his rifle scope camera, or was it a separate camera surveying the scene before he did any shooting work?
I'm actually not sure whether it was rifle scope or a separate platform. Yeah, I would have to ask him that.
But he didn't shoot anything anyway, he just observed it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Do you know how it influenced him?
I think he was aware of the subject of big cats and had heard various stories, but had never seen anything up to that point. You know yourself, Rick, when you engage with witnesses, you get that emotional response of their sighting, of their experience. And it was quite clear that he was telling us that this was no moggy, this was a big cat. He could tell from looking through that scope that it was something significantly large. And that came across very directly as he was telling us his own story.
Well, good for him, anyway. And that's good that you got to see some scaling like that. Great. And can you describe the other one from northeast Scotland then? What did you see? What was there? What was in the footage, and what was it taken on?
So this was daylight footage. It was very clearly a large black cat against just plain green field. The shape and form was looking just right for black leopard on that. In speaking with them, we got the impression they were quite guarded enough and sensitive enough about it that they didn't really want folk coming to the location. And so, it obviously spoke to them there to try and reassure them about our own efforts as a research team, that we operate confidentially. And we make efforts to ensure that active locations are not disclosed online at all. I did make contact with them after, but they were obviously not wanting to anything to go further than that, which you only have to respect.
Yeah, and what were the circumstances in which they took it? Was it just a surprise opportunity, or had they seen something before and they were primed for it? Did you find that out?
They had operated a farm on their lands, and apparently they'd seen it several times, seen it a number of times, and so they just started filming it whenever they saw it. Yeah.
It's from their own land, so they've got a camera to hand, and I think that's the situation where people can be ready more than just seeing it as a surprise thing and you fumble for your phone after you've realised it's not a dog or something. So, yeah, well, good on them anyway. I mean, it's great that people share these things, even if it's just, a one-off.
Yeah, certainly.
There may be other visitors to these stands, to our stands, that have things up their sleeve, and we don't get to see them and they don't reveal them.
We never know what we're going to get with our presence at a show, but we were really quite bowled over this year. Usually we would come away, over the past 2 years, we've come away with around 50 contacts, 50 emails to follow up on over the course of the weekend event. But this year, I think we had about 75 contacts at the end of it, and we just seemed to be busy at the stand every day from start to finish, which was great. A lot of interest.
It is. It's pretty tiring, isn't it? But it's incredibly rewarding. And
yes,
I think once you start it and you are accepted and embraced, it's great to keep it going, because you almost sort of feel you're helping to mainstream the subject, and people look around expecting you to be there, which is lovely.
Yes, yeah.
I think you've got to keep on it and keep persevering. So excellent that, and good for them, good for those people for embracing you, because you could also be shrugged off. Not everybody wants to open up about this stuff, and it's a slow burn subject in many ways.
We find it useful also for making contact with various organisations that are present at these events as well. The Wildlife Crime Department of Police Scotland had a presence there, and we had a great conversation and put ourselves across as a point of contact, which, might bode well into interesting places in the future. And National Farmers Union there, of course. So, organisations that are involved with our wildlife and ecology, it's always good to have a presence there at least and put ourselves forward as a point of contact.
Very good, yes. I mean, I have to say I found some of those sorts of organisations a bit standoffish in some of the rural shows I've done, which, again, I think it's a bit of a culture shock for them. They're surprised to see somebody making a case for big cat evidence and big cat dialogue, and I think people are a bit wary. But that's, again, maybe the longer you do it, the more time it has for them to sink in and think, yeah, we will start networking with those people because they are credible, they are responsible. We make progress that way.
I found that because we have to deal with people very directly, I found that even with these organisations, it depends on exactly who you talk to. And I found from even the same organisation, one year we'll speak to an individual and get a very standoffish approach, and the next year we'll talk to someone who has no problem with the subject and is very happy to chat with us. So yeah, I think it depends who we get to speak to.
I found that exactly. That's life, isn't it? It happens in all walks of life, especially ours, yeah.
Exactly.
And was it this event where you heard about the carcasses, the road traffic accident carcasses that you got briefed on? The key one I remember you mentioning was Dumfries and Galloway, a puma type cat seen on the edge of a road being recovered. So that was quite a revelation. And I know you asked this lady if she was prepared to come on the podcast, and plenty of people decline invitations, but you can brief us on what she explained to you, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it was a witness who, driving along a road, had seen what she clearly saw on reflection as a large cat, a large brown cat that answered the description of puma. Was processing this down the road and decided to see if there was a way of securing that on the way back. So on the way back, a number of military type vehicles she described as the carcass was being loaded from the side of the road. There's been one or two other similar stories, you could say, from past years that have come to us, and we wonder quite what's been involved in terms of who's first reported that to what authority and how that's led to military involvement. It's a bit of a mystery, to be honest.
Just to clarify that one in southwest Scotland, she originally passed a dead cat on the side of the road, thought, blimey, that's interesting. And then on her return journey, she noticed it was being recovered. Because didn't she have a quiet word with them, and there was a vet and military personnel doing the work?
That's right, yeah. There's reference to a local vet in attendance as well. It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? You know, what authorities were first notified would be the one I'd be keen to know, and how that word has spread to deployment of, perhaps a military reserves unit or such that's been there to actually deal with the carcass. It's all a bit strange, it's all a bit interesting, but we certainly had no reason to doubt her. She seemed quite certain as to what had happened and was providing quite a bit of detail with it.
I mean, my own take on these sorts of cases is that there may well not be any kind of orchestrated, systematic approach to carting off the evidence, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
I think often it happens on a one-off situation. A local police force is asked. I think if you see a dead one on the road, most citizens in Britain are likely to phone the police, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I reckon local police force phoned, and whoever was on shift that day just took it upon themselves to think, well, hang on, this is not something we ought to be telling the public. It's very sort of, it could rebound and very tricky and sensitive, and we'll be left holding the baby and lots of questions we can't answer. So let's get it recovered, and a local military can help out and ask a local vet, and we'll ask them to keep quiet about it long term, and because it's sensitive. So it may be that that's happened again in exactly the same way, but it could have just been a one-off because somebody just took the initiative to do it that way at that time, and it never got out. I think the key question is, though, where those bodies end up being looked at and examined at. It had to go somewhere other than on an incinerator or something. But so somebody was perhaps asked to look at it and catalogue it, and whatever was probably has to keep quiet as well. I mean, it's no good thumping the table and asking them to own up, because if they feel it's sensitive and they were asked to not report it, well, they have to live with that. It begs lots of questions, doesn't it?
I think you're quite right. There's not going to be a coordinated protocol, a standard protocol from any council across the land as to what to do. So I think it's more a matter of passing the buck. And the local reserves unit's got an unusual request in, and they've made an exercise of it. I think that's probably what's happened here. Yeah,
very frustrating, but I mean, I think we will one day, somebody will beat the official bodies to it. And in fact, I should say that times in the last year, I have been involved, and largely through Facebook. I think all but one were Facebook. One was a podcast listener reporting thought to be dead bodies on sides of motorways or main roads and whatever. And on all occasions, they were followed up pretty quickly because I happen to know people. Just totally coincidentally, I knew each location, and I knew investigators and researchers who were near there and contacted them. They happened to be in, and they obviously were very motivated to get to that location as quickly as possible. I think on one of them, the guy who went thought it was a misidentified split lorry tyre that had actually come to rest in the form of what could look like a big cat on a motorway verge.
I think we've all done double takes on lorry tyres at the roadside before.
Yeah. I mean, it may not be right, but it did seem to match the location reported. But on the other, one of them, the most recent one in Cumbria, which Sharon followed up, turned out to be a dead roe deer. But the way it was splayed out, she could see how it might look like a puma to the passing motorist. And again, in a way, we don't mind false alarms because one day it'll be the real thing, and the stakes are high. Got to go for it. But on the other two, there was nothing, and you think, well, has somebody scooped it away before us, or what? Because they weren't. We didn't hang around. So we've got a good system of follow-up now. Yes,
I think we do. We've experienced the same ourselves up here, and last year we had a report of someone seeing what they thought was a big cat carcass at the side of the road, and I think within half an hour to 40 minutes we had a team member at the location, and they confirmed it was a deer. We surmised it was the evening light that was seen in, and the position it was in, that made it look like something else. So. And we didn't mind the false alarm, as you say. We saw it as an effective exercise that told us we could get someone on location swiftly enough if required.
No good punishing people for giving us false information when the intention and motivation was the right one, because it's well worth doing, and it's a good training exercise. Proves we can do it.
Yes.
Okay. Can we hear about what you would regard as the most striking, significant, interesting report? Because obviously you hear lots of reports. Some of them get onto Facebook, not all of them, perhaps. What's the one that you think is most memorable in the last 6 months or so, either from Facebook or to you or through the Rural Show event?
Mm-hmm. There was one that we have since followed up on. That was quite a striking report, because very often your reports are run of the mill in terms of crossing roads in front of cars and defined shape seen, but it's a swift and fleeting sighting. But this was a sighting with a mother and her two sons who, on a local woodland walk, appear to have disturbed a big black cat that answered the description, size, everything of black leopard, which bolted only when they were relatively close to it, and bolted from the undergrowth to then bolt up a tree. And it was only then they realised that on the bough of the tree there was a carcass of a deer, still with blood dripping apparently, and the cat vocalised at them as well. So there's a lot going on with that sighting. It was a close encounter. It bolted up the tree where there's already a carcass, and you've got vocalisations and a very clear description of the cat, the height, the length of the body, the shape of the tail, and the sound that it made. So quite a visceral one and quite a close one. Certainly not your everyday sighting.
Yeah, how did it affect them?
It was a while before she went back to that same spot in the woods, because they certainly knew without question what they'd seen. So we managed to locate the location and get some team members out there, but we've not had any evidence come back from there. I'm going to follow up with my team members on that one tonight, actually, and see if they can get some trail cameras at least in there.
If a cat's been up a tree, that tree ought to be watched by a couple of trail cameras if the landowner allows it, if it's safe and responsible to do so. Were they shocked, surprised, excited, or mixed emotions? What was the overall influence of them from that event?
I think shock was the first response. Like I say, she chose another route to walk for a while after that. So yeah, that was quite an interesting one for us.
It does beg the question, if a cat goes up a tree and there's a carcass up a tree, why wasn't it photoed? Were they just too shocked and wanted to leave the scene?
I think that was the case. I think they were just wanting to swiftly move away from the cat. It had already warned them, and I think they were close enough to it to begin with. They decided to just remove themselves responsibly from the area.
Rather than try and document the situation.
Yeah.
Whereabouts roughly was that? I know you don't want to go into detail.
That would have been, let's say, northeast Scotland on that.
Fair enough, yeah. So you've got people in the location to follow up.
Yeah, we have quite a healthy team in northeast Scotland. It's an area that's been active for at least 50 years. And so, we've got a good number up there now.
We heard a bit from there earlier on in the year on the podcast. We enjoyed that. Yeah, well, good luck. Let's hope the team make progress up there soon.
Yep, here's hoping.
Right, and we're now going to talk about your team members coming together, because you now have an annual sort of get together, a sort of training, swapping notes and moral support and social everything get together over a long weekend. And your last one was just 2 weeks ago, at the end of August, start of September, and you also did some field work, sort of training, practice, honing skills and everything. And our word of the week, it's an important word for all of us, is field work, because you did some field work during that event. So tell us about highlights of that event then.
Yeah, it was great. So this was the second annual gathering of the Scottish Big Cat Research Team. We had a bit of a hoolie last year. Really, it was just a social more than anything for members to get to know each other. And then we visited the Highland Wildlife Park on the Sunday last year. So this year we stationed ourselves in Fauquebars, which is up in Moray. We were quite intentionally stationed there because there was a history of at least four or five decades of activity around that area. Yeah, we met on the Friday night and had a good healthy social. And on the Saturday we had a full day of talks and demonstrations. So I'd give a talk on my PowerPoint presentation on big cats in Scotland. I'd presented that publicly earlier this year at Llanbride, which was a village close by. Then we went into a discussion on sensitive issues in big cat research, which there were several aspects of that to discuss.
What are examples of those, Paul? Public safety or perceptions of public safety, that sort of thing? One of the issues was, how do we deal with or approach or talk to farmers or gamekeepers who make their intentions known, that they've either shot them or they fully intend to shoot them? Issues like this. And then Paul Macdonald, who's very active up on the north coast, gave us a talk on trail cameras, operation tips and tricks, which was very helpful. We had lunch, and then we had a talk on kit and casting. So the kind of kit that you would have in your grab bag, basically, to go if you're deploying out for field work. So everything that's useful for that, including equipment for casting prints and swab kit, and just various other useful pieces to have out in the field. Very good. I mean, I always enjoy seeing what some of my colleagues and mates have got in their kit bag, because you sometimes get good ideas, and also you know what to sort of swap between you, because sometimes carting in a lot of stuff, if everybody's repeating the same baggage, it's weighty, but so I'm always the one who's got the pruning saw, for example, and it's so often secateurs and pruning saw are so often useful when you're setting up trail cameras or getting to inaccessible places. I use them most of the time.
That's a good bit of kit, actually. That's a good call. So there was three of us delivered a talk on that, and Sam Baxter, who's one of our Fife team, gave a wee talk on his drone and operating that, and it's got quite a decent camera set up on it as well. And then Sam ran our big cat pub quiz, which was good fun, and that led to dinner on the Saturday evening. We also had a raffle and an auction, which was great fun as well. And so we actually managed to raise enough funds for our team that we're ready to buy our own branded gazebo for future events as well. So we've done well for the team that way.
The costs mount up for making a presence at these events. You do need a slush fund for this sort of thing.
Another healthy social on the Saturday evening. I think we managed a couple of respectful 4 a.m. sessions Friday and Saturday night.
Feeble.
So we do work hard and play hard, and but then we were up on the Sunday morning for Exercise Black Forest, and this was a decent sized fieldwork effort with a research team of 9 of us in all, doing walking through Fochabers Forest in search of evidence from historic activity there. And we walked 2 trails through that forest. And then I'd spoken a couple of days before to a local farmer who had some sheep go missing a number of years ago. And so he gave us a lead on an area of forest up there that we had the chance to do a bit of field work in as well. And we managed to come back with some skeletal remain evidence from that as well.
Oh, excellent. So you actually achieved something. It wasn't just theoretical, it was practical. You
Yes.
got something to look at, investigate.
Yeah, and there was a very suggestive scat sample that came back from our main forest effort as well. It was good to come back with something from that as well, and also just to be able to operate on that scale of field work rather than just 1 or 2 of us. We had 9 of us in a decent sized line each time, with 3 walkie-talkies and radio comms between us as well. So nobody got lost, which was a success.
So genuine boots on the ground and see what happens, but in a coordinated way.
Yep.
And just so people know where this location is, this is really northeast of the Cairngorms, isn't it? North and round the corner from Aberdeen, basically.
Yeah, a bit further north, yeah.
It is a history of reports, mainly black ones, isn't it, I think, that way?
Mostly has been. There's been certainly some links around the northeast as well. We've had reports around there.
Okay, well done. So everybody was sort of charged up, a shot in the arm for renewed efforts from everybody. So excellent, well done. I think It's very important to get together and mix a social with actually doing some kind of training. But I mean, going to Highland Wildlife Park was, of course, people might see it as a bit of a jolly, but it's still very useful because you've got interesting mammals to look at and lot going on there. For Scottish wildcats, for starters.
Yeah. It was amazing to see the leopards there, actually, and just appreciate the size and their movement, and even just to see them standing, not on their back legs, but standing on their forelegs and scratching at trees, made us appreciate we sometimes have to look down as well as up if we're looking at trees as well.
Good point, yeah. In terms of progress, I mean, every time we have you on, we sort of ask you what your progress is. And I know that you've done super work with mapping, and some of that mapping has attracted media attention, and also very positive, progressive media attention. I would regard that as a very good progress point. What do you reckon your progress points are in the last year or so?
I think it's really just been certainly building our own network as a team has been key. We're now at 80 team members throughout Scotland. We have a dedicated national message group on Facebook that's fairly stays on track most of the time for discussions. But then we have subgroups, message groups for coordinating more local fieldwork efforts so that it doesn't clog up the main group as such. That's been a main part of our own progress as a team, is actually just swelling the numbers at a steady pace, I think, and a good healthy approach to fieldwork with everyone.
Okay, and in terms of just general week-by-week sightings reports that come in to you guys, including on the Facebook group especially, how's that going? Is it just go ebb and flow like they do, or would you say that you're seeing an increase, or does it vary? Is there any trend?
We still notice, I think we noticed it again this year, 2 main points at the year where we see little spikes in sightings and activity. And that seems to be at the start of spring when the vegetation shoots up and suddenly there's more cover to range further out in or take experimental ranging routes. So we seem to get more sightings in around that time. And then, of course, at harvest, when a lot of that cover suddenly isn't there anymore. they're maybe be given less choice about, crossing more open territory.
And of course, cats like to explore areas for stranded rodents. I think there's that, because you see more foxes and domestic cats mousing around in cut fields, but including big cats sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we are seeing that again this year. It's always interesting to see that as a pattern.
And what about, I was hearing from some of the Facebook admins, who I know do a lot of sterling hard graft on all of this.
Mm-hmm.
They reckoned in recent months the algorithm to bring the issue to people's attention must have been in their favour. They've seen another surge of membership in recent months. Have you seen that in Scotland? Do you think it's to do with the algorithm, or is it just awareness and interest growing, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit difficult to say overall, but we've certainly noticed wherever there's a couple of main UK big cat sightings groups on Facebook, and I think whenever there's a prominent Scottish sighting appears on the UK groups, then yes, we seem to get an influx of members. Also, it seems to be when we have a localised Facebook group, a local community group on Facebook, where somebody more randomly puts up a big cat sighting, we'll suddenly get an influx of members. And usually it's quite easy to tell if we, suddenly get an influx from Inverness-shire or Fife or Dumfries and Galloway, for example. We can usually tell in advance of being told there's a sighting that there's been a local sighting there somewhere. But usually that information will get to us in short time anyway.
Well, that's good, because that's organic growth, isn't it? I just liken it to sort of rolling a snowball downhill, and you pick things up and harness the benefits from that. So
yes, exactly.
Great. Well, it's so good to catch up on all these points, Paul. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close off?
I would just encourage anyone that's interested in getting involved in fieldwork. If you're in Scotland, get in touch. We'd be happy to hear from you and welcome you on board as part of the network. Anyone that's interested in the UK, find your local researchers, find your local group and get involved, because what we find is the more eyes that are out there, looking for the evidence and actively doing the field work, even if it's only the odd day here and there, it's only getting out there that's going to bring in, the good stuff over time. So, yeah, if there's an interest, get involved.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Paul. So good to hear all that. So good to hear the continuing progress. I'm sure you'll all get your rewards soon. I'm sure we'll keep in touch. We'll look forward to more Scotland sightings, investigations and reports cropping up more on the podcast. Meantime, thanks ever so much, Paul, for your time. Thanks for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
It's been an absolute pleasure once again, Rick. All the best.